All right, YWCA Mission Moves. We are proud to be a part of the Ohio Climate Justice Fund. Listen, lead, share community listening discussions. All right, a little bit about who the Ohio Climate Justice Fund is. The Ohio Climate Justice Fund, or OCJF, is guided by an advisory board comprised of Ohio environmental advocates and leaders that invest in Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC, organizations in Ohio, working with the intersection of racial justice, and climate action. The OCJF pillars are committed and aligned with the JMES principles for democratic organization. And those pillars are being inclusive, emphasis on bottom-up organizing, letting people speak for themselves, working together in solidarity and mutuality, and building just relationships among ourselves, and commitment to transformation, to self-transformation, excuse me. What is Listen, Lead, Share? Listen, Lead, Share is a statewide grassroots campaign that includes a goal of hosting public conversations with community members and stakeholders about the best and most effective ways to address climate and environmental justice in their communities, in our communities. Why does climate justice matter? Climate change is a change that is unusual, that is in the unusual weather found in a place. This also includes a change in the Earth's climate, usually temperature. A climate can take much time and many, many years to change. But we know climate change is not the great equalizer. As climate change gets worse, temperatures will rise the most in poorer countries in Asia, Latin America, and sub-Saharan Africa, despite the fact that North America and Europe are some of the biggest polluters. In the United States, climate change leads to more extreme weather and disasters, such as increasingly dangerous hurricanes like Katrina and Harvey, devastating wildfires, and even the extreme cold weather events of 2021. Poor majority BIPOC communities have less infrastructure in place to protect against these events and bear more of the burden. Pollution, much like wealth, is not distributed equally in the United States. Racism is a public health crisis, and today Black people are nearly 4 times more likely to die from exposure to pollution than white people. Systemic racism has long influenced where major sources of pollution are located within our communities. In the early 20th century, white government planners in many municipalities drew red line maps that identify Black and Latino neighborhoods as undesirable and unworthy of housing loans. Heavy industry was permitted to clutter, in those places, adding a toxic dimension that persists today. Today's focus, grassroots growing, organizing community movement around climate change. All right, before I hand it over, I want to introduce today's moderator that will engage our panelists in a very informative conversation around climate justice. Charmaine Webster is an ordained minister, preacher, teacher, and founder of Womanish Projects, a faith-based women's rights 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on Black women and girls. She is known for her out-of-the-box thinking, engaging speaking style, and love for God and people. She is the visionary behind Day Without Women in Church, which Womanish Projects will host this summer on July 31st at Levitt Pavilion in Dayton, Ohio. In addition to her ministerial work, Reverend Charmaine is a multi-talented entrepreneur. And we know that because she contributes her talents to YWCA in every way that she can. She is the CEO of Tinka's Treats, a home bakery specializing in sweet potato pies. She's a wedding officiant, premarital counselor, and consultant focused on family and community engagement, racial justice, and grant writing. Charmaine's clients describe her work as transformational and life-changing. Born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, she now resides in Dayton, Ohio with her husband, Benjamin, and we're so happy to have her. So without further ado, Charmaine Webster.
Thank you so much, Donna, for that wonderful introduction. And what's funny is in high school, my musical theater nickname was Champagne. So
I know where it comes from.
So you're not 100% wrong, but thank you all so much for this invitation. And I am excited to share with our wonderful panelists today about growing grassroots. So how do we get the boots on the ground to create a movement for climate justice? Before we start our discussion, I would like to introduce our fantastic panelists. First is Guy Jones. Guy Jones is a Dayton celebrity, so let me start there. And he is the author and co-founder of the Miami Valley Council for Native Americans. He is a member of the Standing Rock Sioux Nation and is a prominent voice for the Native American community in Ohio, serving as an advisor to the Cincinnati Museum of Natural History, the Minority Task Force for the Ohio Arts Council, the Greater Dayton Christian Race Relations Task Force, and the Bias Review Council of the Ohio Department of Education. He's joined today by Leslie King. Leslie King is the director of the Rivers Institute at the University of Dayton. She has a significant background in environmental protection and community-based natural resource management. For over 20 years, you don't look a day over 20, but for over 20 years, Leslie has been educating and inspiring the next generation of environmental and sustainability leaders, from serving as an outdoor and environmental educator to her work with the UD River Stewards today. So I'm looking forward, guys. And before we jump to the questions, I would love for you all just to share what else you want the viewers to know about you and your journey as we start this discussion.
Go ahead, Leslie. Ladies first.
Okay, Guy, I thought you would do that, but I was going to defer to you. Thank you, Charmaine, so much. Thank you, Donna, for those introductions and for having us here today to talk about this important topic. I would just add to that I'm from Dayton originally, and so I was not born here, but my parents, my grandparents were all born here, and so I come from a very deep-rooted Dayton family. My great-grandparents and my grandparents are still in this area, right? And so I take a lot of pride in that. My ancestors are here, right? My immediate ones, and I feel rooted to this place. Now, that doesn't mean I never left. I left for a good chunk of time. I was part of the many people that thought you had to go as far away as you could from your hometown to learn things, right? And so I went as far away as I could and left for, I think, at least 10 years before I chose to return home and understand really some of the amazing strengths and assets that we have here in Dayton, on top of, clearly the challenges that we're going to talk about. But I am proud that I was able to have the privilege, and I made the choice to travel to places where I could learn things from other cultures and other communities and bring them back here, I think, to Dayton. So I think that's something that I'm really proud of in my past 20 years of work.
Wow. That was short. I want to go on, first of all, the introduction, Charmaine. There's several things that, and I've been trying to get people to, but everybody keeps bringing that old bio up. Because a lot of those organizations, like you take, for example, the Interministerial Alliance, we went our separate ways. The Minority Arts Council, we went our separate ways. The Department of Education, we went our separate ways. It was a mutual agreement, meaning for the fact that I don't think like everybody else. I mean, it's I grew up on the Standing Rock Reservation. I was in my culture. And one of the things is that I recognize and I see things. One of the things that, I got off the bus, Greyhound bus in Dayton, Ohio in 1981. And I began a conversation. But one of the things that really intrigued me about Dayton, because you see, I was on a quest. I was trying to understand America's hatred. I spent 6 years in Oklahoma, the heart of the Bible Belt. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me, mainly for the fact that, just what was getting perpetuated in regards to hatred and bigotry, especially in the churches. And, and that was one of the things is that, so as time went on, and I began to look for that, and it was real evident here, especially in regards to redlining and how things were laid out. It was very well defined. So basically, I began to look at that, and I began to realize the construct that was taking place and how things were basically laid out. Even in getting to know these various communities, I was at an advantage when I first came here because nobody knew me. I mean, I wasn't black, I wasn't white, and so I just kind of went about my business, and people were accepting. They didn't know who I was. They, a lot of times people thought I was Hawaiian. I don't know where they got that from. But anyway, so I got involved. And, I started to involve myself. And one of the things was one of the first eye-opening experiences I've ever really had was when I had gotten married and I moved to Jefferson Township. And suddenly it's like, boom. I'm like, because here was Jefferson Township, which was probably one of the first middle-class African-American communities in the region. And just how those separations and those divides, those divisions, and not only was it, by community, but it was also even within the churches. I got involved with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I really miss those conversations that I used to have with, like people like Raleigh Trammell, Jesse Gooding, Reverend Cunningham. Those conversations, and really begin to understand these dynamics that happen. And I know that, today when we talk about a number of things, especially in regards to social justice, environmental justice, we tend to separate them. But in actuality, they're the same. The words look different, but the mindset, the construct, the foundation is still the same. And that is one of the things is that, so when I talk to individuals, I try to get them to grasp a little bit about certain dynamics and things, because you see, well, like I said, I grew up on a reservation. And just how things were done on reservation, we were like the guinea pigs. Everything was tried out on us first. And so I began to see that. And that's like even now, my separation with the Interministerial Alliance, in a sense, I remember I went to a gathering one time, this has been years ago, at Island Park. And a number of ministers had gotten there. And I'd been invited, so I went down. I wasn't a minister or nothing, but I'm Native American, so they thought, there needed to be a Native American involved. So they invited me. I went down, and one of the ministers came by and said, "So when did you accept Jesus as your Savior?" I said, "I never have."
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Oh, I can't do this. I can't deal with this." And other Black ministers threatened to leave. I said, "Don't worry." I said, "I'll leave." I said, "Y'all ain't there yet. Y'all ain't ready for me." And I left.
Yeah, and I think that is so, just that example of what you show is so critical to what kind of gets in the way of organizing and having those grassroots movement in our different communities. So thank you so much for providing that example. So just starting off with some simple questions. How do you see climate change impacting our community now or in the past and possibly in the future?
Yeah. You want to go first, Leslie, or?
This doesn't matter, but I will if you want me to. You can go first if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, the climate change, climate change has been happening for quite a while. It's been going on. Everybody keeps talking about saving the climate, saving everything. Oh, don't worry. It's already doing it. What we are looking at is the result of nature taking care of itself. It's healing itself. It's correcting itself for past mistakes. What are those mistakes? What have we done? And I mean, you can just walk downtown and go to the river and look at the river and just look at that and see what's in that river. And you'll begin to see. Just take a walk along the river and the smell, it doesn't smell as bad as it used to, but but it's still there. And so it's like, but the climate is healing itself at this moment. We are behind. We are not recognizing what we've done. We're the problem. Human beings are the problem. We're not recognizing it. We're not recognizing and making those changes, so that, these things we can go, and we need to learn. One of the things is that, what did you say? One of them was listen. We're not listening. We're not learning anything. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that we're doing right now. And we're all in it. We're all involved in it. So all this record heat, hey, there's some days coming. This is only the beginning. So.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Guy's been saying. I reiterate his point that social justice is climate justice, that environmental justice is climate justice, that social, climate, and environmental justice are all one and the same. And until we really fully understand that integrated and intersectionality of those things, we won't even get why it impacts the Miami Valley, right? Because we're not climate refugees yet, right? Climate refugees are coming here, right? But we have severe social justice issues in the Miami Valley that are and will continue to be directly related to climate change and environmental justice issues. And so whether you're looking at our existing air quality, right? That is just horrible. And how it affects our families and our children and our youth. And that's the outdoor air quality. Our indoor air quality is poor in some of our communities as well. And so that will get worse, right? Extreme weather events will get worse. I mean, these are the proven facts in the Miami Valley. We will have increased precipitation. We'll have increased hot days and heat issues like we're having now. We will have increased flooding, right? And stormwater management issues. And all of those things will affect poor people more than people who have means, right? And so if you don't have enough money to pay your electric bill, what's that going to do to you on those hot days? If you don't have the money to afford bottled water, right? As we deal with PFAS in our water, like whatever it is, if you don't have the means to those things, it will impact our communities more. But those are the climate justice issues we're facing, our public health issues at large. We have a history of extreme flooding here. I want to point that out too, because we have a very resilient community. And when people talk about climate change and climate justice, they quickly hop to resiliency, right? And I want to reiterate that Dayton is an incredibly resilient region, and we always have been, I think. at least from the history I'm aware of and that I know, right? And when you look at even just the Great Flood alone, let alone our earlier history, because it came well before that, before we were Dayton, right? There were rivers, so there was flooding, and we were learning to live with the land, right? And in the rivers. That flood allowed our community to come together and be incredibly resilient and independent on ourselves. We relied on ourselves. We raised our own money locally to pay for the flood protection that we have today. It was the largest public works project to date in the country. And we came up with the money alone here in Dayton. So I think that resiliency has pushed through our loss of industry, right? We've had to be resilient, and through a lot of the challenges Dayton faced, up to tornadoes and the mass shooting, like resiliency is a key to our community. I mean, Dayton Strong is not just a term to throw out there. It's something to think about and build on, and think about grassroots movements and organizing, how we can take that Dayton Strong and understand we have the resiliency here to combat social, environmental, and climate justice. So those would be my main points. I mean, I could go on, but I'm going to.
Yeah. So you said a lot. So you both said a lot, and you all are in this every single day. There were a couple of words that I would like to get clarification on, just for those of us who may not know what they mean. The first one is, what is a climate refugee? And then the second question is, what is PFAS or PFAS? You said that it was in our water. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about climate refugees, Guy? You want me to answer?
Well, and I mean, it's like we hear about it on the news all the time, especially when, this past administration kept talking about our southern borders. Those are climate refugees.
Exactly.
And I mean, it's like, and the thing of it is this, is that what have we done? What have we done to their country? Because of the obsession for cheap beef and gas and oil, we've gone into those countries on capitalism. It's a capitalistic system has gone in and basically polluted the land that they can't even grow their own crops. These were
it's unsafe.
Yeah. And and so the only place that they have that they're trying to survive, and yes, they come to this country. They're trying to survive because of what we've done, the atrocities that we've committed in their countries.
And the compounded impacts of those decisions, right, that leads to the climate change and climate justice we're dealing with. And I'm glad Guy started with that, because all these migratory movements of humans is related back to climate change. And people think climate refugees are only people that live on the South Pacific Islands and the water's rising and they have no island left, right? Because those are the extreme ones. There are extreme people who have left South Pacific Islands to go to larger islands or somewhere to really escape their island being lost. But those aren't the only climate refugees. Those are the extreme ones. And what Guy's talking about is true. If you do some research, if you look into the migratory movement of humans, it does relate all back to climate change. I spent time in the 90s working with the Mountain Institute in the Andes and the Himalayas, looking at the way those mountain cultures and communities were already trying to mitigate flooding from climate change in those glacial lakes, knowing that they wouldn't be able to live there. Go ahead.
Well, it also makes me think about Hurricane Katrina, those people also being climate refugees.
Yep.
I think that gets at how separating the language and separating, kind of how we think about these policy keeps us from actually addressing the multifaceted pieces of what we're dealing with. I was a chaplain in Atlanta in 2011 at a homeless shelter, and it was full of people from Katrina. I mean, years later. Right. Yeah. So I've met climate refugees. I just didn't know that that's who I was meeting. No one had given me that language. So thank you for that clarification. So you all have brought up two really important pieces as we think about this piece of growing the grassroots, building a movement. You've talked about the racial separation and how that is a challenge for us to actually building grassroots movement. But then you also talked about our strength of resilience. So how do we address this separation and use our resilience to build a movement? What do we need to do for those of us who are ready, Guy? Because you say y'all not ready for me. I'm ready for you. Those of us on this call are ready for you guys. So what do we do?
It's the narrative.
Yeah.
You have to go, and so many of us fall into that narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to begin to, that narrative. We need to own that narrative, and we need to put that narrative out there. And we need to begin to go and look at that, just that narrative, how we address these issues, how they're addressed, and not let mainstream dictate to us. And that's one of the things is that, like today, changing those narratives is vital to survival.
Yeah, I would agree. I think changing, and it's a lot of this, I've spent luckily the past 5 to 7 years, I don't know, or so, 5 years or so more getting to know Guy, and his view and his perspective and lived experiences have really helped open my mind to a lot of things. And it is the narrative that needs to be changed, and language is important, right? And I think Guy always reminds me of that as well. If we keep speaking in these terms of separation, we're going to keep perpetuating separation, right? And why are we, racism is a justice issue. Racism exists, but we can't continue to use language that suggests that it exists. Somewhere we have to erase it in a way that it's history and not where we're moving. And I think I was at the Dave Chappelle show Sunday night, right? And that live Dave Chappelle thing at the Schuster. And it was about Dave Chappelle's documentary he did during COVID, right? On his farm out there in the middle of nowhere to address the George Floyd killings, really. There were 2 main points. Like, he had to speak about that. And he needed a platform to do it. He couldn't not speak about it. And then he also wanted to get the first live show together during COVID, right? Who doesn't want to try that, right? So there were 2 things going on, but it was really about him, I think, needing to use his voice and speak on that, what was going on in the world around Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. And even in the documentary, when he was talking about it, he was talking about men, just men. Why would man treat a man like this? Why would a man treat a man like this? And I was moved by that language, right? I really was. And I don't know if anyone else heard it, but I heard it, that he wasn't perpetuating that it was this kind of man or this kind of man that did it. And we all know it is, but it just, when are we going to get past the construct of color and get back to this human race? My kids don't see color, right? And so these are the things they do now. They're 15. They've been taught, unfortunately. But when they were little, we know all these kids say things that we know these kids don't see that stuff. So I was just impressed and moved, I think, in Dave Chappelle's very intense documentary on really tough issues. And in a very emotional time, for him to still rise above and use words that made people feel more together.
Yeah, and Leslie, I'm going to have to just push back against that just a little bit, because I think, yeah. Because I think the issue, even like when we look at kind of gun control and like the conversation that we're having about guns in this nation, who's a mass shooter, all of the language that we're using, a lot of it is racialized, right? And so to pretend that it's not present and to act like it's not there, I think that erasure wouldn't necessarily help us with the justice movement, but also inviting people to see that this is a part of your story as well. And so I think that through, as we're changing the narrative, right, and inviting us to see, well, you know what, I am a climate justice refugee. I am suffering from this. That we start to see how all the stories go together, but that doesn't require us not to see the difference. I think It's just inviting us to also see the similarities. And so the erasure of difference, I don't think helps with addressing similarities. So I'm just going to push back just a little bit, but that's why we're having this discussion, because we all bring our strengths to the discussion. So you all have been doing this work for 20 years, Leslie, over 20 for you, Guy. I'm guessing, like you said, you came here in the 80s, so that's over almost 40 years that you've been doing the work. What are some stories of people that you have served during that time about, that have been impacted by climate justice here in the Miami Valley? What are some of the stories that are local to our own town that people should know about?
Good. I mean, it's in regards to the climate. I mean, that was one of the things, like, even at that, it's, I want to go and kind of reiterate, I told you earlier on that there are certain conversations that I miss. And, because one of the things is that those conversations that I had with, people like Raleigh Trammell and Jesse Gooding and them, those conversations were about social justice. And there was no separation. Now, those same organizations, I try to have those conversations with those same organizations today, and they want to talk about Black issues. And I'm like, wait a minute, let's bring this back. And, because those conversations, I was having those conversations with these individuals years ago when they were trying to put in the landfill over there. And when they were wanting to put in the injection well out in Jefferson Township. When they begin to, all of those things regarding the water treatment plant, Sunwatch. How I really got involved with Sunwatch was because of the water treatment plant. And it's just right there. And, of course, they discovered that it was an archaeological site, and which today we now have Sunwatch. But a lot of people don't know that history. And, and it's right across the street from, a chemical plant. And, and that whole region at Edgemont is now, those are brownfields. Those are contaminated neighborhoods. And nobody's addressing those. Right there on 2nd Street, and right behind, I always forget the name of the church, right there on 3rd Street, but it's right behind on 2nd Street. There's the fence is real high and it's big. That's where they used to store the uranium to build the trigger for the nuclear bomb. And it's in West Dayton still. Nobody's doing nothing about it. And the thing of it is that, so those narratives, those conversations. So if we're going to be talking about economic development and social justice, we need to look at these issues as to what happens and how did those things develop and how did they come about. But the thing of it is that, we can talk about West Dayton, but also I just explained to a bunch of high school kids in Oakwood, I said, do you know why you guys are like a gated community? I'm like, your grandparents all worked for NCR. These were the people who created the algorithms, and they were the ones who worked on top government secrets in developing the trigger for the nuclear bomb. So the government guarded you guys to make certain that you didn't spread any information. I said, that's why you all have this really guarded community. That's why you have your own shopping district. I said, everything was designed to keep you all separated. I said, because you were working on this government secret. And
I'm sorry.
No, it's like, so there's so many things that when you begin to look at, and that's why I tell people all the time, there's so much history here. And, and it's very well defined. And if you looked at it, and then it's like, are there answers? Yeah, there's answers. But first part of finding the answer is recognizing that there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's one of the things is the other day, this young lady got mad at me because I told her, I said, what we're seeing today, I said, most people don't realize, I said, that our society has been heavily influenced by the Abrahamic faiths.
Mhm.
And I said, when I say the Abrahamic faith, I'm talking about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Mhm.
And I said, those are all religions of blame. And it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve about who to blame. Who gets the blame? So when we start looking at how even media today portrays certain incidents, it's always about who's to blame.
So I'm interested because from what you all have shared, there seems to be a real need for education,
Mhm.
a real opportunity, because the separation and the way the narrative has gone forward, it's made people think that this isn't my issue, when literally the issue is in the soil that they're walking on. The issue is in the water that they're putting in their mouth. The issue is in the air that they're breathing. How are your organizations educating people, and how can we get more people to learn from you so that this issue can be brought forward?
Well, nobody, we're not part of those conversations. I mean, when, we don't get invited to those conversations in regards to, and it's like, and that's one of the things, like even, and Leslie will tell you that I kind of shocked a bunch of people when I told them, I said, well, if you really want to understand the construct and how it works in regards to systemic racism, I said, Gem City Market is the beacon of systemic racism. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for co-ops. I want it to work. But how that came about, you need to look at it and just understand that that's how the system works. Understanding the system and the system and how that system works and how that came to be.
So I'll speak a little bit on the education aspect. So I've been with the Rivers Institute for 13 years, and a big part of the Rivers Institute's work is, awareness, education, community outreach, and how you build pride of place in where we live because of our rivers and our water resources. And so the Rivers Institute was formed by community partners who came to UD and said, we want UD to do something about the river. We want UD to be a leader in the community around how important the river is. We kind of need everyone to come together. So it's interesting because as much as it became a grassroots initiative, it actually was initiated by some community agencies and organizations that understood the importance of us needing to learn again that our river is important, right? And so we built flood walls around it, levee walls around it. We polluted the heck out of it during the Industrial Revolution. And really for over a century, our region turned its back from the river completely. And not many people know or knew that there's an aquifer that we sit on top of that's the world's really richest and most replenishing, largest aquifer in the world. So if you don't even know it, how are you going to understand the challenges, the problems that it might face, let alone be able to protect it and preserve it? And so through that work, the past 13 years with the partners and the river stewards, we've been able to kind of create a movement in the community of understanding that, the rivers are important. It's who we are in Dayton, right? We're a river city. And if you can get people to actually get out and experience them, so you can educate them in a classroom or on Zoom, all these things. But in the end, if you can get people to go out and experience something, so if they can experience the river, if they can experience a really quiet, peaceful walk along the river, a beautiful sunset along the river, maybe a kayak trip down the river, maybe paddling in whatever it might be, they'll build a relationship up with it themselves. They'll say, wow, maybe the river is kind of cool. Maybe it is important. Maybe we should protect it. But as long as people think it's just there and they take it for granted, whether it's their electricity, their water, the soil, like you mentioned, Charmaine, because I mean, even our soil, like I found an invasive hammerhead worm in my soil yesterday that has come up from the tropics due to climate change. Started in Texas, now it's in Ohio, and I found one of those gross things in my garden yesterday. It is disgusting. They get up to a foot long, they have hammerheads on them, and they're cannibals, and they release a neurotoxin. I was so scared of this thing. It can't hurt me or my dog or anything, or even my vegetables, but it was the grossest looking thing ever. And they eat earthworms. They have caused havoc across the world in countries because they eat earthworms. And what do we need in our soil for healthy, arable, growable soil, right? We need earthworms. So to be honest, that's a new thing in Ohio now. And those little hammerhead worms are going to make a big deal if we don't do something about it. And so the biggest issue that I'm seeing with people that in climate justice in our community is that people want to do something, but once again, they don't have the means to do it. We don't have the access. So we need to make sure we build programs and opportunities that allow people to have affordable access to renewable clean energy, electric vehicles, local food, all those things that help us reduce our carbon footprint in the community, right? And then we need the city to do its work and create the solar fields that they're creating so that we are all just purchasing from solar power, right, through our electric bills. So you got to have, leaders in the municipality and in some of these government or nonprofit agencies to be able to make the narrative we want to happen, which is affordable access to clean living, which will reduce our carbon footprint and help address climate justice. But right now, the way we have it is we have zoning ordinances in Dayton that still don't allow people to have chickens, right? Well, I think maybe having chickens is in this day and age, maybe a good solution. So I think we actually need to look at how we look at our zoning and ordinances in the community and how we allow people in our city and our region to grow their own food or not grow their own food. These are all things that start to address it because small impacts make the large collective impact. Small actions make the collective action.
Okay. What? Yeah, I'm like, I'm kind of speechless because you all have blown me off of my feet thus far. Are there any questions
Wait a
from our
second.
guests?
Are you speechless often, Charmaine? I got to ask that question.
Rarely. If you can tell, I am rarely speechless. But I just feel like, I've learned so much, and I do, I'm like, dang it, man, I've dropped the ball. How can I get involved and what can I personally do? Guy, I think you brought forward a great point about how our faith traditions does inform our view of the earth, does inform how we treat creation, does inform our relationships. And if we have faith traditions that teach us to conquer versus to, be in what's the word I'm looking for? Be in relationship with the earth, that's going to give you a whole different framework on how we approach everything that we do. So I definitely agree with that, and that we need to kind of revisit some of these theologies. There's a question here saying, is there a question around environmental justice that you wish more people asked but rarely got asked? So what's the question that you wish people would ask but they don't?
How do you want it? How do you want the answer? Do you want it by priority? You want it in alphabetical order? Because there's a lot of questions.
Go, shoot from the hip. I guess your top one for now to get us started.
The top one. My biggest concern right now, and it is like, and that was even yesterday, I had a conversation yesterday with some of the environmental organizations in the state of Ohio. And they were like, what is your biggest concern? And I said, getting other people to talk. I said, especially the Black community. They won't talk to me.
I want to know more about this guy. I'm sorry. I really want to know more about this because I think it's like, who are you talking to? And it's about who we see as the leaders.
Yeah, because, it's like Leslie invites me. I go in and talk to those kids, down there with the river stewards. You know, I talked to members of the EJ Academy at the University of Dayton. I've talked to Oakwood high schoolers. I've talked to
Free guy
Centerville high
everywhere.
schoolers. And it's like, but I've only had one teacher in the 40-some years that I've been here. I've only had one teacher from Dayton Public Schools ever invite me into a classroom. And I've only had one minister invite me to come speak to a Black church.
Well, I'm so glad that we are having, I'm being serious because you all have brought that forth, that there's that this separation is really causing an issue. And so I'm glad for the YW to invite you out. And thank you, God, that I'm here as the moderator today, because that's going to change. I'm being very serious about that. And that's why Womanish and the YW is here, because we recognize how important this is. And we know that's something that has to change. So thank you. So that's an opportunity, is to engage the Black community more in conversations around environmental justice. Thank you. Miss Leslie, what's your number one concern?
Okay, the number one concern, and I just want to reiterate what Guy's saying too, that I think he keeps asking people, or at least he was asking people at the hub over there at the Imagining Community Symposium, why do we keep saying BIPOC? Why do we keep saying BIPOC, right? And so I guess I keep kind of following Guy's lead sometimes on like where he's taken me. I guess I just want to point that out, that he's been a serious mentor of mine the past 5 to 7 years. And I think there's a lot of people we can learn from, right, in our own community if we look. And we ask a lot of Guy, and I think he gives a lot to us as an elder in our community. And I just want to point that out. My biggest concern is the question I would want people to ask is, how urgent is this? I think I would want people to ask me that question, because I would say, you know, I was panicking about this in 1991 when I chose my college major, because I knew it was urgent then, right? And there were people probably a decade or two before me that knew it was urgent in the 70s who created the environmental movement, or the EJ movement, right? And that very first People of Color Summit in DC. So I just think, I wish people would ask what the urgency is, because it's incredibly urgent. And if you're a parent or grandparent, or if you care at all about the next 7 generations, yeah, it's incredibly urgent. I would want people to ask that question.
Okay. Any more questions from our viewers?
We're running out of this by the year 2035, and that's not that far away. We're running out of fresh water.
Yeah, that gets back to our aquifer, Charmaine, and you asked about PFAS, right? And so we have some great protections set up in our community to protect our well fields in this buried valley aquifer that we have. And there's a social global responsibility to protect it if it can provide clean, safe drinking water for way more than our region, really, for large amounts of people for a very long time, to the point where they could tunnel it and ship it out in a pipe if they wanted to, and if we let them. But if the protections we have aren't enough, we still have contaminants that we're monitoring, and we still have the potential to have mass contamination in that aquifer, which would really be detrimental. And so that education awareness about our rivers and our aquifer here in our community are key, because like I said, water is becoming a sacred and limited resource, clean, safe drinking water. So that is the next thing we would want people to really care about and ask, how we can protect our river and our aquifer.
I'm just writing this down so that I can have this information for myself. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Is there something that we haven't talked about today yet that you would like us to, that you would like to share?
How much time you got?
10 minutes. Come on, I mean, you can become the moderator if that's, if
no,
that's
I mean, you know, it's like, because I mean, there's so much. And I mean, you know, and there's so much in all of this and the effects of it, you know, when we, like I was saying, you know, there is no separation when, especially when you're talking about social justice and environmental justice and just justice and what is justice. And, you know, when you begin to look at all of those, but it needs collaboration. And I mean, if you look at, that's just like, talking with, like even with Leslie's group, the River Stewards, those collaborations and those efforts and those exchanges are vital into, a better, not only just, an environmental, whether we're talking about, the earth, whether we're talking about, cultures, whether we're talking about social justice. And I mean, that's like, and that was one of the things that, and before I forget, the YWCA, I really appreciate you guys.
Mhm.
I want to say that much because we've had some issues in the last couple of months relating to murdered and missing Indigenous women. And y'all like stepped up, whereas nobody else did. Y'all stepped up. And I appreciate that. But it's collaboration.
Yeah. And caring, again, going back to caring, that leads to collaboration for sure.
Right.
So is there a book or something that you would suggest that we read? Is there something that we should be reading, or that could help those who are starting on this journey?
A book?
Yeah, is there something? You know what? Next time.
Any websites, like resources.
I think I haven't read this yet. I'm more of, I like pick up books and I leaf through them. I'm really bad at going from beginning to end. That's my issue. But Braided Sweetgrass is a book that people keep bringing up, right? And I think that's a powerful, from what I can tell, that book's really moving people. And the author, she's really shifting the narrative. That's what she's doing in that book.
Here's a book that I'm currently reading. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, Love and the Soul, Creating a Future for the Earth.
That sounds good too.
Okay.
And I mean, it's about those narratives, and it's like, and that's a book that I'm reading, but I do that just to see what's out there. But if you really want to learn,
talk to people.
Take your shoes off and go walk on the earth and listen. And listen. Because it will tell you. One of the things that I always tell people, and I'm not the only one that's ever said it. and it relates to faith. And it's like, and that's one of the things is that, faith is about letting go. And when you let go, and one of the hardest things to ever let go is this construct of God. And once you let go of that construct of God, you're going to realize something. You're in the presence of our Maker and everything in creation. And if you listen, they'll tell you. So.
Yeah, I think I'll reiterate Guy's final point, that, the opportunity, there are great things in our community. We've talked a lot about the challenges and the environmental, social, climate justice issues, but we also have these amazing green spaces in our community. We have great nature. We have great parks. We have great protected areas. If we continue to move forward in a healthy way with what we have, we can have a very sustainable, equitable, vibrant community.
Yeah.
We have the tools. We have the riverways, we have the green belts, we've got the blue greenway. People try to build that. People around the country are trying to build blue greenways. Well, we already have this beautiful blue greenway. And we have these really diverse, culturally unique communities that live around them, right, in our region. So we're colorful, we're dynamic, we're resilient, and we've got these amazing natural resources to be in community with. And so it takes what Guy said, getting out in nature and doing what the forest bathing, right, is popular now, or understanding that food is medicine, and that sitting by a body of water and listening to a creek or a river can actually calm your neurological system down, right? There's true health benefits to being in nature. So I think those are the things I would recommend. Just take advantage of what we do have. We had an Environmental Justice Academy this past year in Dayton that graduated, 20 new environmental justice leaders in our region who hopefully will go out and start leading these collaborations with a lot of other people. And I would just say there's hope and there's movement. And I think our community is responding in a really unique way. That is who we are. I would say that I'm seeing that.
Well, and I even as you were talking, I think that the movement of health and wellness, of self-care, of different practices that people are feeling comfortable integrating into their life, I really do see that because it's shifting who is in charge of the conversation, which is what some of what you all have been pointing out, that when certain people are in charge, there are voices that are silenced. But I think that COVID-19 especially changed a lot of minds, and everybody kind of realized we need to make a change personally, communally, whatever the case may be. So I do think that we are ripe for a grassroots movement. And I thank the YW for putting us in conversation today with two of our regions, our state's leaders. And I hope that you all will reach out to them, but also do what they said, which is get outside, touch the grass, breathe the air, let it go, and trust and listen. And the solutions that we're looking for to healing the earth will tell us if we follow its lead. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Leslie. We really appreciate you both for being here. And I'm gonna be hitting both of y'all up after this, because I had talked to Gas, so he can just act like I'm crazy for 20 minutes. But thank you again. Donna, I just passed the mic to you.
Oh, this is just so good. And we thank the Ohio Climate Justice Fund for lifting up, listen, lead, and share this topic specifically around environmental justice, because environmental justice is social justice and it's racial justice. And so we honor both of you, Leslie and Guy, for being here with us today and providing mind-blowing information. And thank you for your resources also. We thank everyone for joining us today. And our second iteration of Listen, Lead, Share. And before we go, I want to just highlight some ways that you can support and connect to YWCA Dayton. Let me get here. Oh, shoot. Here we go with my specialness. So I'll just read it off. If you'd like to volunteer with YWCA Dayton, please go to ywcadayton.org/volunteer. For any events that we are having or hosting, such as Mission Moves, ywcadayton.org/events. To support YWCA monetarily, ywcadayton.org/help. And just for general awareness, please follow us on any social media platform at YWCA Dayton. Again, it was an honor and a pleasure to have you all here. Charmaine, thank you again for moderating. Everyone, have a great day. Get outside, take your shoes off, and get in nature. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Charmaine.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.